My name is Father Thomas Loya. I'm a pastor of Annunciation Byzantine Catholic Church in Homer Glen, Illinois. Also a co-founder of the Tabor Life Institute for Marriage and Family and John Paul II's teaching on the theology of the body. All issues of human sexuality, marriage, and family. Now, I said good afternoon to you. I'm going to say that in a different way. I'm going to say glory to Jesus Christ. That's close. See, in my church, I'm a Byzantine Catholic priest. I'll explain what that is in a minute. We greet each other saying, glory to Jesus Christ. And you would say back to me, glory to him forever. So you were close. So, glory to Jesus Christ. Glory to him. Very good. We have several sayings throughout the year, several greetings. That's our common one. The other one is, like, for instance, during Christmas, we say, Christ is born, and you would say, glorify him. Coming up on Pascha, Easter, well, I'm not supposed to say this yet, anyway, we say, Christ is born, Christ is risen, and you say, indeed he is risen. On January 1st, we celebrate the feast of our Lord's circumcision. We say that Christ is circumcised, and you say, ouch. But our most common greeting is, glory to Jesus Christ. Glory to him forever. If you don't know what a Byzantine Catholic priest is, I'm going to take you through 2,000 years of history, church history, in just 2 minutes. I'm going to use my poor man's PowerPoint presentation. I have a rich man's, that's for next class, actually. I'm in here next time, too. So, but my poor man's power presentation will help you understand who I am, actually, as a Byzantine Catholic priest. I just need you to think in terms of, geography. Remember geography? Remember the hemispheres, northern hemispheres? Okay, the eastern hemisphere, western hemisphere. Think of the world as far as the eastern and western hemispheres. Civilization developed along two worldviews, basically, an eastern approach and a western approach. Well, so did the church. So when the church developed, it started from the Holy Land, where Jesus was, and spread out. If it went east, it took on the character of the eastern culture it was in. If it went west, it took on the character of the western culture. So here's my first slide of my poor man's PowerPoint. Hopefully you can see that. It's pretty beat up. It's my poor man's PowerPoint. Okay, this is like the church. Orange and blue is like east and west. You see, they're together, like a marriage, like man and woman, right? But they're different, individual, always remain individual, who they are, distinct, yet one in marriage. Well, the church was the same way. So you had the Eastern church and the Western church. John Paul II called this the two lungs of the church. They breathe together as one. It's like a marriage, but you see, they're different, east and west, depending on the geography. Well, unfortunately, the history of the church is something like sometimes what happens in marriage, relationships. There was some disagreements, and it got to the point where they had a divorce. So what happened was, in the year 1054 AD, they split. They divorced, called a schism, a great schism. This part called itself the Roman Catholic Church. This part called itself, from that point on till today, the Orthodox churches. You heard of them? Some of you might be, I don't know. So Orthodox Church, Roman Catholic Church. It's called Roman Catholic Church because it had one center in Rome. This had 4 centers. Now I'm going to fast forward 500 years. Well, you notice, there's a piece of the orange back with the blue, right? Okay, so what happened is, starting about the 16th, 17th centuries, this is after the split, 500 years after the split, some of the Orthodox and the Roman Catholics made up, and they reunited again. Okay, this one right here, that's me. That's right. These are what we call the Eastern Catholic churches. There's actually 21 different ways to be Catholic. Most of you know this one because it's Roman Catholic, or technically Latin Rite. The other rites of the church, the other 20 different ways, are in here. So this is the Catholic Church. Now, just to finish our history, there was at this time another breakup in the West. That's called what? Protestantism, right? Protestant Reformation. So the West got split too. And then a piece of the orange got mad again and went back to the orange again. That's silly, isn't it? Okay, but now look at this. Here's the Catholic Church. We're missing all these parts. Look at that. But we still got the East and the West. Okay, here's me here. Here's most of you. Most of you are Latin right, I assume, right? Okay, so we're under history now. Then there are breakups in the Protestant churches. So now the church looks like this. That's how it looks today, the great scandal. All broken up. But this is still the Catholic Church hanging on there, hanging on, missing all these parts. But this is where we are today. So 21 different ways to be Catholic. Okay. Who's your Pope? Some of you hesitated. Who's my Pope? Very good. Okay. So we're all one happy family, right? Just an East and West, like man and woman, right? It was funny. I find that hardly anybody knows about the Eastern Catholic churches, but the one thing they seem to know is we have long services. I'll get a call. What time is your Mass? I say, well, our Divine Liturgy, we call it Divine Liturgy, starts at 10. They always ask, well, how long is it? I say it's timeless. The teenagers like it. They say, that's cool being a Byzantine priest, Father. You get to wear the bling. But now, just to understand, I'm not an order priest. I'm a parish priest. Like a diocesan priest, we call them eparchies, just like many of your priests or pastors. It's just that I belong to a rite, just like you do too. A rite. A rite means an ancient, venerable way of living out the faith. Just according to where it developed. They're ancient and they're venerable. So the Latin rite is very, very ancient, right? Very ancient and venerable. So are all the Eastern churches as well. So we're all different rites, but one church and one pope. But whether East or West, the one thing to know about our church, the Catholic Church, is that there are no such things as teachings, and there are no such things as rules. You see, this conference, I think, is based on or inspired by the bishop's call to Eucharistic renewal, correct? Well, a Eucharistic renewal is impossible. It's a joke. It'll be fruitless. Unless there is a complete renewal of the church in every aspect, and most importantly, how we see our faith, how we see life, how we see what Catholic is. You see, Catholic is not a religion. Boy, I'm headed toward getting canceled, aren't I? There's no teachings, there's no rules, and it's not a religion. You know what it is? It's the way. It's the invisible, incomprehensible, ineffable, inexpressible, uncontainable God that becomes visible, tangible. We can touch Him, taste Him, become one with Him. And it's about seeing all of life through that vision. There's only one reality, one way of life. One. That is what Catholic is. You have to see life through what I call a sacramental, Catholic, human, liturgical worldview. It has nothing to do with rules and teachings. You have to put on your Catholic glasses. By the way, I'm wearing Catholic glasses. You thought they were broke, didn't you? They go like that. You put them on like this, pow, you see everything Catholic. They're all going to get an issue of these at the end of this talk. And when you see everything's Catholic, when you go to touch that thing you see, it turns to gold. Now, if you don't see through these lenses, what you touch will turn to garbage. The Eucharist is the source and summit of our existence, right? Source and summit, which means it's everything, which means it has to encompass everything. Everything we see. Our whole orientation to life, to liturgy, to marriage, family. The Eucharist is the blueprint for all that. I wonder, what do the bishops, what do you expect out of a Eucharistic renewal? What does that mean? I know one thing that motivated it. When the bishops and us priests, we were like a punch in the gut. We found out that 70% of Catholics don't believe in the real presence. And you know what happened right after that study came out? And we were all reeling. I was, as a pastor, I was like, just crushed. What? You know what came out right after that? COVID lockdowns. So we didn't have access to the Eucharist, did we? So I'm sure the bishops are trying to get people to realize this is the real presence. But you're not going to believe that unless the rest of the church and your life supports that, makes that real. Which means everything has to be consistent with what the Eucharist is. You know, it's not just this token you get for showing up. Some kind of symbol of inclusiveness, everybody gets to play. It's not a vending machine. What are your names of your parishes? St. Mary's, right? St. John. It doesn't say St. Vending Machine, right? Put your envelope in, pull the lever, got my Jesus, and I'm home. It's about an entire way to experience and to see God, and to take that to every aspect of life. And it begins within ourselves, how we look at the Eucharist, how we understand it. You know, our faith, our church, this Christian thing, it's not inclusive. It's very exclusive. Stop trying to be inclusive, making everybody feel good. Everybody feel included. That's why we need a Eucharistic renewal, because that's a false idea. It's exclusive. You have to make the grade. You have to be, what is required before you receive Eucharist? What sacrament? Baptism. What is that? A radical choice to denounce evil and to live for God. You are immersed in that water. My church, we immerse them 3 times. Even the baby. All the way in, out. We're going to drown the baby, Father. That's the idea. Yeah, that's the idea. We drown the old self, kill it, and we rise to our true self. That is a radical choice. Not for the faint of heart. And you take vows. We still do the exorcisms in our baptisms. Do you renounce Satan? We ask again, do you renounce Satan? And we chase Satan away. Every Byzantine priest is a sort of exorcist. I do an exorcism, a full exorcism before every baptism, even if it's a baby. We chase away the devil. And the person faces, they have their back to the church, in the back of the church. And then they turn around, and I ask them over and over again, do you accept Christ and promise to serve him? Yes. Do you accept Christ and promise to serve him? Have you accepted Christ? I have accepted Christ. Now pronounce the act of faith. I believe in one God, the Father Almighty. Only then do you come forward to be included in a very exclusive church. Where's the first place we Catholics go when we want answers? right? First place I go. It says here in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 10, whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. In Luke, he says the same thing, but he uses the word, he who does not hate father, mother, sister, brother, daughter more than me, or who does not hate them, is not worthy of me. Did he mean hate? Well, it was a Semitic term of emphasis. Can you imagine anything more exclusive than this? Who said it? Father Tom Loya? Jesus Christ. If we want Eucharistic renewal, the first thing we have to know is who we are in relation to this God that we want people to believe is the real presence. In the early church, when you were baptized, you didn't sin anymore. So it was presumed, especially not a serious sin. Now, you can only be baptized once. But during the persecution, sometimes somebody apostatized. They left the faith out of fear of being persecuted. So they were excommunicated. They left, they betrayed the community. Another sin was adultery. If you committed adultery, you could not come to communion again for 9 years. And in those 9 years, you had to do something in stages. You had to stand outside the church while everyone walked in and plead for forgiveness. After so many years of that, you were allowed to come in the church, and you had to kneel, but not in the church, in the narthex, beg forgiveness. Finally, you were allowed in the church, and you had to stand up in front of everybody, confess what you did, and ask forgiveness. For 9 years, for adultery. Now adultery is a virtue. A virtue. St. Basil the Great, great Byzantine saint, said, 9 years, that's too harsh. Make it 7. That was early church. Why did they do that? Because when you were baptized, especially if you're an adult, it's presumed you did not sin like that. You didn't break ranks anymore. You were part of this elite in a humble way, not an arrogant way, exclusive, if you want to call it club, of a radical choice to denounce the world and heroically follow Christ. It was just assumed you would do that. Well, when they didn't, they were outside the community. So the church had to come up with a way to get them back in when they wanted to come back in. They were sorry. They couldn't be baptized again. They're only baptized once. So they looked into scriptures. They looked at tradition. And they said, Jesus said, whose sins you shall forgive, they shall be forgiven. They're held bound, they're held bound. So, we will bring them back in through a second baptism, which we know is confession. But through that rigorous penance for years, as time went on, the church realized that, well, people can do other sins that they're sorry for. And this was finally admitted, maybe it was a little harsh for lesser sins. So we have to come up with another way. And that way was to go to the priest. The reason you go to a priest, the world says this, Catholics say it, what I got to confess my sins to a priest for? He's just like me. I'll just confess them to God. Well, you can confess them to God, but that's not good enough. The reason you go to a priest, there's a few reasons, actually. One, because when we sin, we don't just offend God privately. It's my private sin. It's between me and God. I'll just sit in my room and tell him I'm sorry. Everything's fine. Yeah, we offend God, but we also hurt the community. You have to make up to the community. You have to reconcile with the community and with God. And God is present. The body of Christ is what? The church. You hurt the church by your sin. And so the meeting point of heaven and earth is the priesthood, the office of priesthood. Now, secondly, you get the consolation of hearing the words of forgiveness. You can't just hear them in your room by yourself. Oh, did God talk to you? Oh, yeah, I heard God say, I'm forgiven. You don't hear those words. And those words are healing. You know that. You know how you feel after you've gone to confession, right? So hearing those words, which are really the words of Christ, you go to confession. In my church, what we do is, as long as there's no one around, so the tradition in my church to go to confession is, we have it's called an icon screen. It's a screen in front of the altar. It's got icons on it. Icon of Christ. You stand in front of the icon of Christ. You face the icon of Christ. The priest stands perpendicular to the icon. You're confessing to Christ, but along with and to the church as well. And then after you confess, the priest does absolution in my church by taking his stole, called an epitrachial, that hangs around his neck, and he puts it over top of your head. And he pronounces the words of absolution. The other reason you go to a priest, because when you go to confession, it's like going to a doctor. Remember, it's a healing sacrament, isn't it? You got to be healed. You go to a doctor, you want to be healed, right? And what do you do to the doctor or with the doctor? You tell him what's wrong with you, right? So he sits there, right? And he writes out a prescription, right? Or whatever. Tells you to do something, gives you advice, therapy. He says, do this. It'll help you become well. But you have to commit to it, right? Otherwise it doesn't work. The same thing in confession. You go to the priest, you're going to the doctor. To receive healing advice. You can call it penance. My church, we don't emphasize so much penance. It is that. It's more like medicine. How we can help heal you. Do this to be healed. Not only, it could be prayers, could be whatever, but oftentimes it's something more. It's something you have to do or stop doing, or it's a little more involved so that you heal. It always, in the prayers of the church, especially anointing of the sick, we always say for the forgiveness of sins and the healing of the body. Healing of body and soul. You see, sickness, physical sickness, came into the world through sin. So if you heal the sin, you can heal the physical sickness. You know, when God made us, He did not make us to get sick, to be fat, bald, have pimples and wrinkles, and die with our bodies rotting in the ground and our souls going to the next life. That was never the plan. The plan was to stay intact, body and soul, and enter into heaven, body and soul, intact, like the Virgin Mary did at her Assumption. It was sin that broke that. Now the body gets sick and dies. And the soul has to wait. The reunion of that body with the soul, the way it was meant to be in the beginning. But to be reunited for those who are saved and gloriously transfigured forever. And so we go to the priest because it's being honest about sin. I hurt the community, I must make up to the community. I offended God, I must make up to God, and I am sick. I need a doctor. What a gift is the healing sacrament of confession. And renewing the Eucharist means to renew our sense of confession, which means our approach to the Eucharist. No one's entitled to it. We come to the Eucharist like a beggar. You know, if we really were Catholic, we'd crawl on our knees with our heads down across that floor to receive that Eucharist. We crawl across glass. What do? Anybody. We march up there like we're entitled to it. Thanks. We're not entitled to it. You know, in my church, the communion prayer, it's lengthy. Everything's longer in my church. We start out, "O Lord, I believe and profess that you are truly the most holy God, and I, a sinner, of who I am the first." It's a quote from 1 Timothy. Everybody that receives Eucharist in my church, every one of us says about ourselves, we're the worst sinner. What about that guy? What about him? What about her? I'm not as bad. Didn't you see that guy in the news? Look at it. Shut up, people. You already sinned. The reason we say that is because the only sin that we know, the full culpability of which, the only one that we know, is our own. Well, we could look at objective behavior. Oh, that's bad behavior. But in terms of judging a person's soul, to have full knowledge of what we did wrong, we can only say that about ourselves. In your liturgy, in your Mass, I believe it's still there. In ours, it's there. When it came time for the Eucharistic prayer, that part of the Mass, you know, the catechumens and anyone who was not fully initiated into this exclusive club, I say that in quotes, was ordered to leave the church, and the doors were barred. Even the catechumenate. You could not even gaze upon the precious gifts unless you were fully initiated. You couldn't even look at them. You couldn't be present for that mystery of the invisible God becoming visible, tangible. So we can literally unite ourselves with Him, we graft ourselves, our own human nature, onto His divine nature. That miracle that happens, you could not even be present unless you paid the price. In my church, the deacon turns to the congregation at that point, because we face east on our anthem in our liturgy. And he says, Catechumens depart. All catechumens depart. Then before the creed, when we're going to announce our faith before we receive Eucharist, you've got to believe. You cannot receive Eucharist unless you believe and live all of the church's teaching. All of it. Because if you don't, you're not in communion. You're not in full communion. And that's what Eucharist is. Before the creed, again, the deacon will say, the doors, and wisdom be attentive. The doors mean the back doors of the church, the entrance doors, which are to be barred. Everybody ushered out who wasn't supposed to be there, ushered out, doors locked, and guarded, so that no one could enter at that moment during these most sacred mysteries. That, my sisters, maybe there's a few brothers here too. That, my sisters, is Eucharist. You're stunned. You see how far we are? How far we've drifted? And the renewal that has to happen? That was the practice of the early church. And the remnant of it still exists today. It is not inclusive. Yes, God wants everyone to be saved. Christ on the cross was trying to draw the world to himself. But you have to make the grade. Not everybody can play. So, how often should we go to confession, besides every day? That's what the saints did. I'm often asked that, how often we go? Well, again, always trust the church. Get into the church instead of doubting it, criticizing it, being half-baked about it. Learn the genius of the church. And trust that. There are 4 penitential seasons in the church. Advent, Lent, before the Assumption, and before Saints Peter and Paul. Fasting season, they're penitential season. They involve prayer, fasting, confession, charity. We're in the great one now. It's called Great Lent in my church, called the Great Lent. So the church says, go to confession at least once a year. Slackers. Golly, the church is so compassionate. Everybody criticizes the church. It's chauvinistic and mean, authoritative, a bunch of rules. How much more understanding can we be? Oh, please, just once a year? Can you go to confession? Is that an authoritarian church? It's a church that bends over backwards for slackers in hope that you'll be serious one day. So 4 times. Beyond that, well, it's up to you. Maybe once a month, every 2 weeks, however you need it. Confession as a priest is one of the several things that above all, that I will drop whatever I'm doing, no matter what time of day, where I am, whatever, and hear a confession. Going through the airport, got my collar on. Someone says to me, hey, Father, here, got time for a quick confession? I say, quick confession? I'll be the judge of that. You may end up missing your flight. One time I was on a Southwest flight, and I was in the front row, so there was nobody behind me. There were 2 women sat next to me, and I had these free drink tickets. See, in Southwest, if you fly a lot, they give you free drink tickets. So I had a bunch of them in my pocket, because of course I'm a priest, so I drink moderately. So I had them all piled up I didn't use them yet. So these women sat next to me, and the stewardess comes around, can I take any drink orders? And the women started to order them, and I whipped these out. I said, you know what, I got these extra drink tickets. Can I buy you a drink? I think, oh, shoot, sorry, I'm a priest, can't say that. No, can I get you a drink? Would you like a drink? And the woman turned to me and said, no, but I will take a confession. So there I was, 35,000 feet in the air, looking out the window, hearing a confession. One time I sat on the plane, this woman sat down next to me. I can tell she had a few drinks, probably worked the nerve to fly, you know. She belts out the whole plane. Whoa, I'm so glad I'm sitting next to you. I said, why? I can't fly a plane. Well, you know, in case it crashes, you can hear my confession. I'll do that. First confessions are one of the most endearing things in the priesthood. My first week as a priest, I remember I sat down in the confessional, and we do it like I was doing it there. You know, you can do it face-to-face, or you have a little screen. So I'm sitting there, and I hear this, you know, hearing confessions, and I hear this little voice, a child, bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I fought with my brother, I took his toys, and I committed adultery 12 times. I'm like, can you tell me more about that? He said, he or she, I don't know what it was, who or she was, or he, but as a little child, he said, or she said, yes, Father, I disobeyed adults 12 times. So, tell me again why there's a priest shortage. So much fun, no matter where you go. But what do we confess? What are the big ones? Let's see my time here. Oh. My time is just a little bit shorter, so I'll try to finish up. A lot more to this, obviously. But I'll kind of center on one thing, because it's the most common, the most perhaps tenacious, and so on. It's anger and impatience. I'll give you one tip about that. Anger is a defense mechanism. God put it in us so when something is threatened, we become angry so we can defend it. Now, ideally, this is meant for righteous anger. But most of the time, it's unnecessary anger. When you get angry, do this. Realize, say to yourself, do an inventory. You can train yourself to do this. I'm trying to defend something. I'm feeling something's threatened. What is being threatened? You know, 9 times out of 10, it has to do with, when you get down deep enough, our pride. We feel that something is threatened in terms of our ego, our pride, our agenda, how we want things to be, how they thought they should be, what we thought was rightfully ours, what should have happened, that's mine, what about me? And we get angry because we're trying to defend that part of us. And what you have to do is ask yourself, should that be defended? Or should it be defended in this way? Can I shrink it down? It's not so big. What if I got slighted this way? What if that person said this to me or about me? Is it the worst thing in the world? Did I have to react out of anger? Now, the righteous anger, you'll know it's righteous when it moves you to good action. For example, I'm sure all of you are very angry that things like abortion are the law of this land, and boy, is it stubborn. Oh, I'm so angry. So what do? Bomb a Planned Parenthood? No, what do? What do? You pray. You get involved in pro-life march. You write to congressmen, you know, like we're overturning Roe versus Wade. You go to conferences like this. You get literature. You learn more about it, what you can do. You donate to women's centers, right? That's righteous anger. That's a good anger. You know it's good when it results in fruitful effort. The other kind just eats you up. But that's most of the kind we suffer from. Well, we can eliminate it if we do this one little inventory. Identify what you're trying to defend and ask yourself, should it be defended? Especially in this way. You know what we need more than anything else in our world? The one thing missing more than anything? And to me, the starting point for Eucharistic renewal, a real Eucharistic renewal, is humility. There was a monk who was accused by a young lady in the village of fornicating with her. So the men took the monk out of the monastery, dragged him through the town. They're going to put him up in front of the townspeople and put him on trial, punish him. And the young lady saw this. She started to be moved, feeling bad. Finally, she went out to the men and said, leave him alone, leave him alone. I lied. The men said to the monk, do you know she was lying? You didn't say a word to defend yourself.